Welcome, everyone. Hi, everyone. We are so excited for you to be here for our webinar today, Tech Meets Text, Accelerating the Science of Reading Adoption with EdTech. We are so happy to have you joining us today. We're going to give just a moment for folks in the waiting room to come on in. But while we do, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here and part of this important conversation. And while we wait, feel free to drop your name and organization or where you're calling in from in the chat. We'll give just a few more minutes for people to come in. And again, if you're just joining us, welcome. And please feel free to put your name in the chat and where you're calling in from or your organization. Welcome, Deb. Welcome, Erica. Welcome, Julie. And in the chat also, if you want to make sure to click everyone instead of just host and panelists, so we can all see your questions and interact with you. Welcome, Danielle. Welcome, John. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much. We're going to get started. So for those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Dr. Megan Benet, a partner here at the Learning Accelerator. And I have the privilege of moderating today's webinar on behalf of TLA. You'll also see my colleagues, Ashley and Daniela and Michael in the chat, sharing important accessibility information and moderating our question and answer. Throughout the session, please feel free to submit your questions. You can do this either through the chat or through the question and answer function, and we'll do our best to address as many as we can during the question and answer portion. All right, let's get started. So here at TLA, we believe, here at TLA, we are thrilled to be hosting this conversation because, particularly in light of the recently released NAEP scores, we know how crucial literacy skills are for young people and how much work we have left to do to get to where we need to be for the world today, as well as for tomorrow. At TLA, we believe that ensuring strong literacy outcomes isn't just about implementing best practices, it's about transforming learning so that all students receive the personalized, mastery-based, and whole child-focused education they deserve. The science of reading offers clear evidence-based practices to build essential literacy skills. Yet despite its proven impact, these practices haven't reached every classroom. The challenge we face is not just about spreading these practices, it's about reimagining how we implement them so that they meet the needs of every student. And that's why today's conversation is so important. We are very fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Leo Bialis-White, Chief Strategy Officer of Magpie Literacy, Hope Evans, School Success Partner at Coursemojo, Jeff Emmerich, CEO and co-founder of Rock by Rock, and Dr. Sarah Johnson, CEO of Teaching Lab. Together, we'll explore how digital tools and interactive resources can support educators in adopting and scaling these evidence-based literacy practices, enabling more effective, engaging, and responsive ways of teaching. To give a little more background on TLA and why we're excited to engage in this work, TLA envisions a world in which every student receives the effective, engaging, and equitable education they need to reach their full and unique potential. Our work spans across the education sector, partnering with districts, schools, and organizations to build a more connected and responsive K 12 field. We believe that by learning and working faster together, we can change systems to produce radically better outcomes for kids. We do this in three ways. The first is by setting and advancing an agenda for change by communicating an actionable direction for students, systems, and the sector. The second is by accelerating progress on key learning priorities to speed up individual, organizational, and field level learning and action. The third is by building field-wise capacity to learn and share by supporting aligned partners to learn faster in more open and connected ways. Spanning these three buckets is our Exponential Learning Initiative, which is a bold effort to tackle one of the most urgent challenges in education: persistent learning gaps. Through this initiative, TLA is leading a network of technology partners, school systems, and researchers to accelerate learning, not just at the edges, but at the very heart of the student experience. Within ELI is the Accelerating Adoption Network, or AAN, where we are supporting and implementing the scaling of 10 networks, each providing a technology-supported innovation in learning environments across America to effectively understand how they work in classrooms as they scale. Three of our colleagues here today, Leo, Hope, and Jeff, are directly part of AAN. And through the connective tissue that has been enabled by AAN, Sarah has also been working with Leo, Hope, and their teams to ensure coherence in classrooms across multiple literacy tools. As we've been working together these past several months, a common theme has emerged around how we're not just using technology to augment best practices, but how we're leveraging technology to fundamentally change how we're implementing research-backed teaching and learning practices, like those in literacy, to actually meet the needs of every child. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists today, starting with Dr. Leo Bialis-White.
Hi all, I'm Leo. I'm our Chief Strategy Officer. Megan mentioned I started my career as a school psychologist, but I've spent time in education technology, in venture philanthropy, and now here at Magpie. Magpie is hoping to weave two things together. We bring instructional precision from 4 years of research and bring that into really best-in-class technology so we can give students personalized experiences. Our end goal is to have a K-8 literacy solution that is all built on technology, and we want to be responsive to assessing the readers, assessing the reading context, and monitoring this tool for efficacy and bias. I'm so excited to be on this panel with my collaborators today, and grateful to be here.
Thank you, Leo. All right, now we're going to pass it to Hope Evans, School Success Partner at Coursemojo.
Great. Thanks for having me. Once again, my name is Hope Evans, the Director of School Success. Before joining the Coursemojo team, I was an ELA teacher for a number of years, a literacy coach, literacy curriculum writer in-house for a network, and then led a district in a literacy adoption, moving from complete teacher choice to homegrown to HQIM adoption. And now I'm at Coursemojo. So I'm relatively new to the EdTech space, but Coursemojo is a company that is aligned to HQIM and supports schools with being able to differentiate. And it's a AI-powered teacher-facing and student-facing tool with the ultimate goal of increasing student comprehension and analysis of complex texts. We serve we will be serving, we're in a small pilot now, but we will be serving grades 5 through 8 next year across 6 different curriculum.
Thank you, Hope. All right, now we're going to pass it to Jeff Emmerich, CEO and co-founder of Rock by Rock.
Hi, everybody. Excited to be here today. I'm, like Megan said, Jeff Emmerich, CEO and co-founder of Rock by Rock. In my former lives, I was a public school teacher, worked in teacher training and prep for national nonprofits, and then worked on school innovation and redesign, helping to make school models in K-8 more project-based and personalized in order to help students achieve better results, both in literacy and math, but also in life skills. And Rock by Rock is focused on supporting K-5 project-based learning in a library of projects that are fully planned but flexible, that make it really easy for teachers to implement project-based learning out of the box. And we do this because we have seen and we know the research shows that when kids are deeply engaged in a mission that empowers them as learners, they are more likely to grow reading, writing, listening, speaking skills, and life habits because they're super invested in what they're doing. And so our projects support both literacy development, science development, and life skills. And our focus is on, making that more equitably accessible for all kids. And I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you, Jeff. And finally, Dr. Sarah Johnson, CEO of Teaching Lab.
Hi, everybody. A pleasure to be here. So I'm Sarah Johnson. I'm a proud former high school science teacher, and I also lead Teaching Lab. So we are a curriculum-based coaching nonprofit, and we reach 10,000 teachers per year. And we also have a burgeoning collaboration with both Magpie and Coursemojo, and we're extremely excited to talk about what we do to improve literacy, both through coaching teachers and through really exciting and new EdTech tools.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So before we begin, I'm actually going to turn it over to Jeff to give us a quick recap of what we mean by the science of reading.
Okay, thanks, Megan. So we know that in practice, the science of reading has many components. It's not just one thing. And I think sometimes when we talk about the science of reading more broadly, it's easy to default and mean phonics or phonological awareness or fluency, just foundational skills. But as you can see here, there are actually multiple components that are at play, and they're all necessary to really accelerate learning for kids. And that includes oral language, vocabulary development, phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, and comprehension. And they're all part of an interconnected web where they're necessary to work together to help students thrive. These components are also supported by two additional accelerators. And those are growing knowledge of the world and marshaling evidence and communicating evidence. And so word and world knowledge we know is really important. And the research shows that the more knowledge you have of the world, the better you're able to comprehend text because you know the references and the content being referenced in those texts. But also when you study a topical area in depth, you are able to actually grow vocabulary at a faster rate, up to 4 times faster than when you study those topics in isolation. So knowledge of the world actually helps accelerate comprehension. Studying an area deeply also accelerates vocabulary development, and a stronger vocabulary also supports comprehension. So you can see they're all super connected. And this is partly why the HQIM, or high quality instructional materials movement, is really important, because a lot of these programs are content rich, bringing science and social studies into the curriculum. The other piece of it that's super important is marshaling evidence and communicating evidence. And so using text-based evidence in your writing and discourse. This also supports comprehension, because as you become a better writer, you become better able to understand the structure of someone else's writing as an author's purpose. And when you're writing based on the text, you're applying the vocabulary and word knowledge. And so you're getting more at-bats, which also helps transfer that from working to long-term memory. And so you're more likely to retain it. And so we just share this a little bit up front so that we kind of have a working knowledge for what we mean by the science of reading, and also the breadth of research and concepts that actually go into it, and the importance of all of them working together. Megan, anything you'd want to add to that?
Perfect, Jeff. Thank you so much. So with that, as we previously mentioned, despite this evidence base and everything that Jeff just shared with us, practices have yet to be implemented in every classroom. So let's dig into it. Folks, what are the biggest barriers to implementing the science of reading in today's schools? And Leo, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, first off, I want to be careful about saying one silver bullet or one single barrier. I think there's a collection of barriers, and each, we know how heterogeneous schools are, so I don't want to speak for all schools, but I will say that I think coherence at the student level is one of the biggest barriers. And so we've done a lot of research to see how many literacy or literacy adjacent tools schools have in K2, and We think it's somewhere between 10 and 20 when you think across assessment, intervention, core, supplement, anything outside of the bells. And so I think there's a real call to action to making sure that providers are bringing coherence across their tools. There's a lot of incentives to build point solutions. And what I've been very compelled about Teaching Lab is they've used PL to sort of weave tools together. I have lots of other opinions about older grades and where we're missing some key components around multisyllabic decoding and help on more complex text. But I think, I'd love to hear what others think beyond just coherence.
Sarah, do you want to build on that?
Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest barriers is that we consistently and severely underestimate how much support teachers need in order to do something new. That's my succinct response to this. So in other fields, when you change the way something is done, you come up with a whole plan to train people, to coach people, to give them new resources, etc. And we do not do that in education. We didn't do it with the Common Core. And then for a long time, we taught teachers a non-science-based way of teaching literacy. And now the science of reading is on the scene, and that's wonderful. And I love getting evidence into practice. It's our passion at Teaching Lab. But if we do not have a large scale and incredibly intensive support system for teachers, we will not get this right. I think the other barrier that is connected is that we consistently create tools for teachers that are really, really difficult to use. And then they bring us in as a coaching organization to try to fix that problem. But we are often putting the burden of figuring out that issue related to coherence that Leo talked about on the backs of a teacher, as opposed to designing really carefully in context and designing tools that are both evidence-based and that are integrated into the authentic workflow of an educator so that they really, really want to use these tools. The science of reading should feel like a gift to educators because they want to teach kids how to read. It shouldn't feel like a burden.
Well said. Thank you. Hope?
Yeah, and I would just kind of fully agree 100% both with Sarah and Leo. I think the complexity of what teachers have to face is probably in terms of what we've seen, the biggest barrier. A ton of districts have implemented and purchased and implemented HQIM, but they're still struggling with both the capacity and the skill level. And then I think the thing that is also complicating that is the diverse needs within the classroom now. And that's something that really shifted post-COVID. And so now you have a situation where teachers are asked to do tasks that are often more rigorous with students who need more support. And teachers are not superheroes. They are superheroes, but we can't expect them to give up huge swaths of their life to be able to meet all of the student needs. And it's super complicated. And as they're trying to figure out which things to cut, you don't necessarily have that coherence within the building. You don't have it across the district. And teachers are really kind of stuck on their own trying to figure out what best to do. And that becomes really stressful over time. And then you feel like now the science of reading is this other thing that I have to do until the pendulum swings and something else is out there. And that, is not a great feeling for anybody who's working already incredibly hard.
Thank you, Hope. Jeff?
Yeah, agree with everything that's been said. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think one of the challenges also is taking too narrow a view of what the science of reading research shows and focusing almost exclusively on phonics and phonological awareness. And I think that is important, and it's critical foundation that a lot of kids up until recently haven't been getting consistently, but there's so much more than that. And I think the narrow definition is one. And I want to just double click on the coherence and complexity piece. I have as a teacher, as a trainer and a coach, and also with the teachers we work with now, hear a lot about how teachers feel overwhelmed by the complexity of the materials that they get. And this ranges from anything like, I have a 400-page unit plan for a month of instruction, and like it doesn't all fit, and I don't it takes me so much time to just internalize one lesson that I can't get ready for the next day. And then I also have so many different pieces, like how do they all fit together? And so we're almost, the complexity hides the connective tissue between the pieces and prevents us from actually doing something more holistic that could help kids reinforce and see the benefits across the different parts of the day.
Yeah, I'll build just a little bit more there. I also want I want to encourage us to not think about the science of reading as a static body of literature. These things are growing. There are still many gaps for many different student populations that we have not really addressed in the research, addressed in the policy, and addressed in sort of layperson understanding. I think about the work that Emily Hanford did to elevate the science of reading to many populations, but we are still looking to undo some of the you learn to read and then you read to learn, and there's this magic pivot in third grade and there's no learning to read after that. And so I do think there's an encouragement for all of us to not use it as a perfectly static term, that there's nuance, there's places, there's gaps in the research.
So well said. Thank you. So as we're thinking then about these barriers, including as Sarah put in the chat, policy barriers as well. How are you seeing digital tools and interactive resources supporting teachers given these barriers? How are these tools helping to support teachers in implementing evidence-based literacy strategies? And if you can, share some examples from your work.
Yeah, do you want me to start? Okay. Sincerely, up until a second ago, I wasn't super excited about many of the EdTech tools on the market that purported to support the science of reading. But more recently, I think tools like Magpie and Coursemojo show a great deal of promise. And the reason why these tools are different is, one, I think their development has been accelerated by AI and technologies that have come out recently and are fast evolving and allowing us to develop more responsive approaches for teachers and students. And my evidence here of that is I live in New York City, and we have a giant partnership with 200 schools in New York, and it's all focused on coaching teachers to employ the science of reading and improve student literacy. And I love New York. And New Yorkers can be tough. Okay, they're critical. They don't suffer fools. And when I connected both Coursemojo and Magpie to the district leaders and the school leaders that we work with, they immediately adopted these tools. And they are all really excited about the pilots that we're running with them. And I think this is because these technologies are actually embedded within the curriculum, and they are actually responsive to teachers and students. And the people that are working on tools like this, they are similar to what Leo said about the science of reading evidence base. They are engaged in real R&D with teachers and students to continuously improve these tools. So much what we see on the market are EdTech tools that are solutions in search of a problem, and you're trying to sort of force people to use them. But what I appreciate about these tools, as well as the leaders that are running their development, is they are actually trying to figure out how to make these tools as usable and as supportive of teachers and students as they can be.
Thank you, Sarah. Jeff, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are a lot of benefits. I think a couple that stand out are really related to what Sarah said, is that a lot of times when you go and do a classroom observation, it's almost like a game of ping pong where the teacher's up at the front, she passes the ball to one student engages, the ball comes back, it goes to another student. And during that 10-minute interaction, whether you're reading a text or practicing vocabulary, out of 32 young minds or 25 young minds in the classroom, only one is actively engaged at a time. And so what the tech tools do with a heavy focus on literacy and engagement is either provide opportunities for all students to have their brains on and thinking, which is in many ways exponentially increasing the amount of time on task that kids have to practice, which I think is really valuable, regardless of which component of the science of reading you're working on. And then the AI features allow kids to get regular feedback and coaching and support at a level and pace that far exceeds what any one teacher, just no matter how good they are, is going to be able to do in that amount of time. And so I think that's one of the benefits, two of the benefits. I have some others, but I'll let others share before I can continue on with my list.
Hope, we'd love to hear from you, and if possible too, since we heard one of these persistent barriers really seems to be about teacher education. If you could speak a little bit to that as well about how Course Mojo addresses that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the benefits of tech tools hugely is I think the ability to spit out responsive data to teachers so that they're able to be more strategic in the classroom. And so one of the things that we've built into our platform is this idea of being able to show teachers real time, hey, Hope got this question wrong. Here's what she missed. Leo got this question right. Now, as a teacher, I need to actually focus on Megan and Jeff and Sarah, and Hope and Leo, Mojo can actually unstick them in terms of the AI support when students are able to kind of get these back pocket questions to help unstick them. That way, as the teacher, now I'm able to really strategically focus on a portion of the class and really sit side by side with those particular students. One of the things that we noticed over the course of this pilot year, though, is that it was tricky for teachers to be able to figure out where do they insert our activities in terms of their lesson, how does that impact their pacing? And so we partnered with folks like Teaching Lab and Instruction Partners to be able to support teachers in better understanding how to internalize their curriculum and make these strategic adjustments, because oftentimes, and I think somebody mentioned this earlier, teachers might only have a 65-minute period, but they're getting 100 minutes worth of content. And now they're in a position where they do have to choose what goes where, what's most important. And one of the things on the Coursemojo side is we look at those lessons ahead of time, then backwards plan from end of module assessments and say, okay, for this particular lesson, this is the main event. This is the most important thing. So we are going to build activities on that most important thing. And we're going to work with you all in partnership to help you figure out the pacing so that you're able to incorporate this into your lesson on a regular basis. And so we're trying to do a little bit of the narrowing the focus for teachers, but we're also trying to do it in partnership with folks who have deep curriculum knowledge, like Teaching Lab and Instruction Partners.
Thank you, Hope. And Leo, we'd love to hear from you. It sounds a little bit too like, and maybe you can speak to this, you still have to have strong teaching practices. You still have to have a solid basis in, we still need training and we need teacher preparation in evidence-based literacy practices. This technology isn't replacing good teaching, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I also just want to go back to the heterogeneous nature of schools. When we build things at Magpie, we want to think about the classroom where the teacher has gotten a full year of PD and coaching on the science of reading, is well equipped and as a senior leader in their organization, runs the PLC at their school. We also want to serve the teacher who is a long-term sub and just is trying to find their way into the student information system. And so we're trying to make sure that teachers have a unique role. We think that's especially strong on the comprehension side. And we want to be able to be a safety net in schools for those different scenarios where school teachers have different levels of capacity and expertise. I did want to bring up a couple examples just from our tool in terms of how we're trying to address the barriers. One is a research one, and one is a very practical one. So, the research is showing us that linguistic patterns and linguistic assets are really important for learning to read. We saw a lot of that in our research, and so we spent a lot of time translating that into games that show mouth movements. And we spent a lot of time figuring out how do you build a scalable game that works in low Wi-Fi settings that can still show videos of mouth movements. And that's one of those examples where the research is pointing us in a direction, and we got to make sure technology manifests that in a really authentic way. And then the second example is very practical, and it aligns with a lot of what Sarah was saying, which is just we know that PL time and time in the classroom is limited. And so if Magpie is really going to have an impact on the decoding work that students are doing, we know we have to reserve a lot of time for PL, for the core comprehension curriculum, for other PL, like other training. And in the ELA block, we know we got to reserve time for that. And so if we eat it all up, we're not creating a coherent experience. If we say Magpie's only good with dozens and dozens of hours of training, we can't expect strong results. And so we try to build in knowing that there are other puzzle pieces in the classroom.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so two other things that I wanted to add is, and I think one of them we've been touching on, is the tech can help simplify complex practices to make them more accessible for folks. So in our case, for project-based learning typically is something that folks view as something a master teacher is equipped to do. And so by using technology and laying out a starting place as a foundation for projects, which we have in our library, it makes it something it's within reach for more novice folks to use as a starting place with the right professional development. And the reason that it matters is that there are some intangibles that are very closely connected to the science of reading that we haven't touched on yet, but that relates to like relevance and student engagement. And when kids are deeply invested in the content and the topic that they're learning, and they feel like they have a sense of agency and control over what and how they're participating, they're much more likely to engage deeply, to persist through complex text, to want to do the reading and writing. And one of the things we often hear from our teachers when we ask how it's going in terms of literacy development using projects as an accelerant is that often hear things like, this is the first time my kids like really wanted to do the writing because they cared deeply about the topic. They knew they were going to share that with someone else. Kids really wanted to read the text because they were super engaged and motivated. And so I think the use of the tech can help make practices that might be out of reach easier to access. But they also, especially through like really relevant and engaging topics that empower kids, can give the drive that students need to persist through things that might otherwise just feel really hard.
Yeah, Jeff, and I think you bring up a really good point because, you know, we spoke a little bit about how the science of reading is not, it's not one silver bullet, and it's evolving. And there's been some drama in the reading world in the past several years. And I think sometimes there's a sentiment or a feeling that with the with moving away from balanced literacy, or moving away from balanced literacy, we're and going towards this science of reading, we're losing the love of reading, the passion of reading, and all of those things that were really part of the balanced literacy movement. But it sounds like what you're saying is that technology is actually helping us make that more accessible, because now we're able to help students love reading with texts that they truly care about, that are relevant and meaningful to their lives. But we can also use technology to make sure that they are on a level and developing the foundational skills that they need, while also accessing high interest text.
Yes, I 100% agree. And I think you frame that really well. And I think the thing I would add is that within a unit or a block or a thing that kids are working on, we can orient towards, we're reading this text for the purpose of answering a set of questions or building a set of skills, or we can orient around, we are doing this work to build these skills, but in context of something greater that we're deeply invested in. Like we're all going to take action to do something to address food sustainability within our community. And so I think both of those go hand in hand. But yes, tech can be used to accelerate that love and engagement and relevance without losing it by still incorporating all of the research-based best practices.
That's great. And actually, Sean, your question is a great one, and it's perfect timing, as the next question that I had planned. And so I think it will answer your question, is around this concept of personalization. So we talked a little bit about in the introduction, we know that spreading evidence-based literacy practices is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We also have to really reimagine how we implement them so that they meet the needs of every student, and get us towards that kind of personalized, mastery-based, and whole child-focused education that every child deserves. And really practically speaking, Sean asking here, can we personalize that experience where a student can move forward, another student can take more time? So could you tell us a little bit about if you're seeing this type of learning and education with literacy happening in classrooms? And if so, how is it happening? And if not, what needs to change to get us there?
I can share a little bit about how we think about differentiation and same vein, personalization. You know, a kindergarten who starts, there's a real exhaustive set of skills you need to make sure you get through, and you need to weave those skills and isolate it in applied practice. As you get to older students, the variability of what students know and don't know gets even greater. And so we have thought about personalization, particularly for older students, in a couple of different ways. One is, are the games adaptive? So when a child makes, shows a misconception, are you giving them explicit feedback? Are you giving them very educative at bats based on misconception research? Two is, do you place students from an assessment in the framework? And I think that's valuable, but I want to be careful about if we only place kids, we will never catch kids back up. This is the remedial framework that has gotten us into the Matthew effect and many other issues in reading research. But the third piece is, can we do these micro checks, not just at the in the games, but actually like quick knowledge checks to sort of change the trajectory of the kids? This is what we were all talking about in 2010, 2011, 2012 around personalized learning, but I think the technology is there now where we can actually realize some of that future. And so we think very deeply at Magpie, which is, if can a child decode monosyllabic words? Cat. Can a child decode multisyllabic words like education, where cat is in that word but does something very different? And then, can the child read fluently? And are we doing that in a developmentally appropriate way? Those are the types of like broad and personalized decision making that we make, but we think about it on across all of those levels. Hope, I'd love to hear, you've all done a lot of work here too.
Yeah. I think at Coursemojo, we've very much kept the opportunity myth in the back of our minds around like, how do we make sure students have access to rigorous instructional materials and then differentiate as needed? And so we think about differentiation very much as like, we're going to give students the access to the rigorous text, and then we're going to give them an at-bat with the question that everybody is getting. Maybe the student gets it, maybe they don't. But as they're on the activity, then if you get it wrong, you get it wrong again, then we can give you feedback and then back pocket questions to help support your learning. If those then don't unstick you, that the AI is giving you, now your teacher knows, once again, I need to actually sit down with Hope. And then you might have the person next to you who might have a very different experience. They might get the question right and then go to an extension question. So now that those students that are kind of on the higher end of things, they're not necessarily reaching that ceiling as fast. They're being pushed to do more versus the student who might, that question might be right on the money for them. We might ask one or two questions to go deeper and help support their learning. But the idea is that you then differentiate based both on the feedback that students are getting and the questioning that students are getting so that they're able to have more of a personalized experience, but we're not necessarily removing the rigor from them, and we're still giving them the opportunity to access grade level materials. And then the only thing that I would add with that is like, once again, the data that folks are getting, we've used that now to actually then help teachers create student groups based on data. And so we're now helping teachers start to think through, okay, you have this particular gap in your classroom. You should pull Megan, Hope, and Leo for this. And here are some questions that you ask them when you pull them into small groups. Because part of this goes back to the capacity issue for teachers. Once they've internalized their curriculum and they're able to do that, this idea of you being able to differentiate for 30 kids in your class, it's a zero-sum game. That time has to come from somewhere, and a lot of folks don't have it. And so we're also trying to think through, how do we give teachers the materials to do that differentiation, both in small group, through whole class, by then showing, whole class misconceptions and the questions that teachers need to ask so that they can start that process of differentiating, even if they're not completely intellectually prepared to do all of that for every single lesson every day.
Yeah, I'd love to weigh in here as well. So there used to be like two opposing movements in education. And so one was this grade level content movement and a whole group of people who were like, get the highest quality and the rigorous grade level curriculum in front of students. And then there was another movement, which was the personalization movement. And this movement, they were trying to personalize learning for every student, for the 30 kids that you have in front of you. And they were really focused on growth. I think now we are in a moment where these opposing forces actually can come together and improve teaching and learning, particularly with the use of technology, because it really must be a both and. So you need to know what a student should be learning on grade level. You need to, one, have a sort of like radical commitment to ensuring that every single student learns grade level content and learns to be proficient at literacy on grade level. And you have to reckon with the reality that some students need extra time and extra support to get there. So what we're really passionate about at Teaching Lab is coming up with implementation models that actually work. So they're not idealistic, they actually work for this type of complexity. And that's what we're trying to figure out with Coursemojo and Magpie specifically. How do you support a teacher in using a rigorous curriculum and then in figuring out how to use time, and time is a finite resource. How do you use time to actually ensure that you're meeting the needs of students who might be in 5th grade and cannot decode? So that's what these tools are focused on. Like Magpie, I know, is obsessed with figuring out how to support students who essentially haven't been taught to decode or learn to read, how we support older students in learning to read so that they can do all of the amazing stuff that Jeff talked about. When I talk to people that are worried about undermining joy with the science of reading, what I say is, what's like really joyless? What's really joyless is not being able to engage in any of the project-based learning that Jeff is talking about because you can't read at all. So like we've got to face the realities that we've got kids that can't decode and we need to personalize learning for them immediately with technology that can actually do this. And then we've got to work on ensuring that we're doing all of the knowledge building and whatnot that Hope has been talking about.
Thank you, Sarah. Jeff, and I know that you're in a lot of classrooms. You're in a lot of classrooms throughout your days, and so would love to hear if there's anything that hasn't been spoken about yet in terms of how we're achieving this, whole child education using these literacy tools. That would be great. That would be great.
Yeah, sure. I think the only other thing that I would add is that when we think about supporting the science of reading through project-based learning, I think there's sort of two tracks that are kind of happening simultaneously. One is a long game, and one is more of a short game. And so on the long game side, if you're engaged in a series of deep project-based experiences over the course of the year, and all of our projects start with like a real world missions. So like how can we address traumatic brain injury or prevent traumatic brain injury? But through the investigation, kids are listening videos, interactive activities, games, text. Each project has a set of embedded anchor texts, which serve as a text set related to an aligned topic. When kids are doing that, they're building vocabulary and word knowledge, which over time is going to accelerate development because we know that that compounds. In the short term, when kids are engaged in the comprehension components, or they're engaged in the final project, which has a very heavy writing text-based, like writing with text, evidence from text component, it's an opportunity for teachers to provide additional differentiated support based on what kids need. And because our projects are laid out so that kids can move through them in a self-directed way, group 1 and 2 can be working in teams on a project, while group 3 is sitting with a teacher doing a lesson with a shared text. And that text is a rich informational text, and the teacher can use that time to provide additional at-bats based on things that they're seeing kids need additional support with. And so I think the tech can be used to provide really targeted support. The tech can also be used to position the teacher to be in a position where they can pull students based on what they need while other students are continuing along to work because that might not be something they need additional support with. And we have seen that in classrooms be something that frees teachers up to be able to do that, because sometimes when you pull one group, you're worried, well, what's happening with the other group and how do I know that they're still moving along, right? And so I think that's another way that you can support differentiation in reading using technology alongside it.
Thanks, Jeff. As we think about the next question, which is around some success stories and some practical examples of places where you've seen technology being paired really well with the science of reading principles, and resulting in accelerated learning for the little humans who are at the other end of all of this technology that we're talking about. And as we think about that, another I would love to hear from folks as well. If you have any stories or specific examples of students with dyslexia or other learning differences who have specifically benefited from the use of technology, because as we've heard in the research, a real structured literacy approach can be hugely beneficial for students with dyslexia and learning differences. So if you have any specific examples of that as well, it would be great.
Yeah, I can just jump in. So we've done a couple of things. One is we wanted to make a tool that was flexible enough to sit in tier 1 and tier 2 within an RTI or NTSS framework. And so that means that all students can get this, which sort of pushes that makes sure that all students are going to get high quality instruction and opportunities to practice. But if students need more, which we know from the science that there are many students who need sometimes 200 plus at bats on a specific skill, that Magpie can go with them to the intervention block. Magpie can go with them at home. Magpie can go to a tutoring after school activity. And so this affords like a deepening of the skills and practice in the same sort of approachable, coherent way that they were getting it 4 hours earlier in the ELA block. And so we feel like having not creating separate tools across the tiers is an important piece, but also making sure that it can sit across settings. I mentioned the mouth articulation work earlier, but I think that's a really important node for students who have speech language challenges and other speech differences.
And I can share a little bit about course. So for Coursemojo in particular, we were similar to Magpie. We wanted to offer tier 2 personalization and support in the context of tier 1. And so what we've leaned into, because we predominantly kind of live in the comprehension space, text analysis space, is adding more assistive technology. And so both for students who might speak a different language, we offer our activities in all of our activities on demand translation for students that might have some fluency gaps, struggle to decode. They can actually have the text read aloud to them, and it shows each word highlighted so that they have access to that. And then we also have speech to text and text to speech for students who might not want to type, but we're still able to kind of still elicit those responses for students so that they don't have gaps or barriers to being able to really do what we're asking them to do, which is really dig into like meaty text analysis.
Jeff or Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I would say in terms of examples of things we've seen is that when kids are working in a group on a project-based experience that is providing at-bats at different levels in different ways to support literacy development, it gives them all a slightly different entry point. And so we often hear things from our teachers like, I had kids who are my lower level readers and my higher level readers, or I had my students who are on the spectrum with autism, or my students who have ADHD. Like they were like sitting with the group the entire time engaged, and it gave everybody a different place to enter. And this is not directly related to the science of reading, but when you're engaged in something through project-based learning, it gives you a chance to bring some of your other skills and strengths to the table. And so even though you might not be the best reader, you're being recognized for being super creative or a problem solver or having an eye for fashion, if that's the project focus, right? And so sometimes just being seen as a whole person gives you the motivation to want to persist through some of the other things in a way that you might not otherwise have if you don't feel like reading is your thing and you don't get to show up with strengths every day. And so it's kind of one of those intangibles that can actually go a long way for kids who have special needs and feeling like I belong and I can contribute here.
That's incredible.
Can I say one more quick note on just sort of because there was a question about formative assessments, but I also
Yeah.
think it does tie into like how we support all learners. I've had multiple school leaders say like the older the kid, the less data we get. particularly for reading skills. And so how do you know who's struggling and who's not if you're not giving valid, truly high fidelity assessments? And so what I appreciate is Rebecca Cookler, our CEO, kind of from day one was like, we are going to build an assessment into our tool. And so when schools, when students start Magpie, the first thing they do is they take the rapid online assessment of reading from Stanford. And it doesn't require an adult, so it's quick and easy, but now you have the data. And that, that assessment is validated up through 12th grade. And Dr. Jason Yateman has done an amazing job of making sure that the samples are diverse and representative. And so I just think like step one, assess all the children, no matter their age. And that I think is like a really important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, what I really appreciate about both Coursemojo and Magpie and some other tools that are being innovated now is oftentimes teachers think about like learning happens here and assessment happens over here, and you have these like assessment moments. And I think what the technology is allowing us to do is bring them closer together. And if you can embed assessment and the collection of data within a platform and within the activities that a student is engaged in to learn, you are making a much more efficient use of time and resources for the teachers. So like if you go and look at Magpie and Coursemojo, like they are immediately giving information to a teacher that they can use not just to determine what they do next within that platform, but also what they can do next in small groups or with their whole class, et cetera. We need a ton of R&D and focus on that so that we are not pulling away from this like really essential learning time just to collect more data from kids. The other thing that I really appreciate about these tools and some other new tools is we also see teachers spend a ton of time sort of like red, yellow, greening kids and figuring out like, where their gaps are and stuff like that. But what's missing from that equation often is that they are not figuring out like what to do then with that data. So we also need to collapse like analyzing data and figuring out what to do next. So what I also like about these tools is that they're giving concrete recommendations to teachers about what to do with the students.
And we have a great question here from Erica around how these tools actually help teachers shape their whole class instruction. And to your point, Sarah, about knowing what to do, um, could you all speak to what do these tools, and it doesn't just have to be yours, any tools you've seen out there, how are they helping teachers to know what to do, directly know what to do, not just for small groups, but for whole class instruction?
I can speak a little bit to Coursemojo. So we actually give teachers suggestions for how to embed activities. And so let's say you have a particular activity aligned to this particular task in your curriculum, you assign it, students are on the activity, and as the activity is happening, you're getting real-time data on every student in that class as they complete the questions aligned to the task. And at the end of that activity, in the middle of that activity, we suggest teachers do whole class discussion to debrief what the questions that have the most misconceptions, as an example. And so they can actually get that. And so they would have that data. They would get a question or specific questions that they should ask during the discussion as like a turn and talk for students. They'll also get kind of like the key stamp takeaway that they need to make sure is clear before students walk away from that discussion. And then we also give an exit ticket that is for every student that's graded. And so there's an abundance of data there. We know that that can be stressful for teachers. And so then we also offer a report for them to understand what are my next steps with my small groups, with whether or not they're heterogeneous or homogeneous, so that they can then take that data. They can also bright spot specific student work and do a literal looking at student work protocol with students. But we've tried to build those specific teacher tools that really support the underlying instruction that we know is best practices in the classroom.
Yeah, and we've heard a lot about data. Julie has a question. Are the assessments shared with students? Do students have an opportunity to look at their data?
I think there's a broader spirit behind this question. I'll answer the specific question in a minute, but the broader spirit is like, is the student a part of their learning journey? Are we considering where they are at in their identity, their efficacy as a learner? And we've done a lot of research at Magpie to say, like, there's a set of things you might share with a kindergarten, first or second grader, but as you get to older students, there is a real sense of like, hey, I know I'm taking an assessment. This is a test right now. I don't identify as a competent reader, and that impacts my willingness to engage. I don't want to read out loud in front of in a classroom. And so I just want to say, like, the way that we view would we share data with a kid is like, are we bringing them along that journey in a developmentally appropriate way? And absolutely, our later older student designs have ways for students to see their progress. I just want to be a little careful about like the token economy. You're on level 7 if it doesn't mean anything particular, and my kid is on level 8 in Lexi, and I'm actually not sure what that means. And so like I just want to be careful about like the data that means something and move the work forward.
Jeff?
I would also say from a data perspective, because all of our projects culminate in kids producing something authentic that takes action in the world, we use a simple student-facing rubric that focuses on understanding a problem, developing a solution with claim, evidence, and reasoning, and then communicating that effectively with others. You're getting at the argumentation, listening, and speaking skills in there. But we start with the student-facing rubric because we want students to drive their reflection in terms of seeing where am I, what am I prioritizing in terms of areas of strength and growth, and then how am I doing on that so that they feel ownership and agency over the things that they're working to get better at with teachers as the coach supporting that. We're also working on how can we use AI as an overlay to aid students in that reflection for those final projects. Still a little bit ways away, but we are really thinking about like, A, it's important that it's accessible, but B, some of the data should come from the tech first, but some of it also can come from you first with the tech as a check. And so that's also something that we're, working on and thinking about.
Thank you so much. And we are amazingly almost at time. So we're going to use Sophie's question as our final whip around. So try to answer this in 30 seconds or less. For a given district, what do you see as the key levers for wide-scale adoption of these tools? What are the pitfalls? See if you can do all that in 30 seconds. Who wants to start? Just pick one. Go ahead, Leo.
I'm just gonna echo what I said, like let's assess our kids and understand where they're at in literacy. And then let's audit our tools, audit our PL to create a coherent response to those data.
I think the first step in getting tools to wide scale adoption is one, you want them to scale, but you want them to really have an impact. So the first step is we really need to center the student and teacher experience in the use and design of these tools. And we say something radical at Teaching Lab, which is if a teacher tells you they don't want to use something, that is the answer. So we need to stop sort of like being elitist and be like, look, we have this evidence-based tool. Like, why isn't everybody using it? Let's do more PD. We actually have to create things that teachers and students love and want to use in order to get this evidence into practice. Let's do that. And then let's scale what we learn from that experience.
Thank you. Hope?
I would say adoption of you're starting with a strong foundation and adopting HQIM, and then really thinking about which tools are going to support the goals related to your HQIM implementation. And so if it's not aligned and if it's not what you need based on the gaps that you are seeing in your implementation, don't do it. And that helps with the complexity that teachers are facing.
Jeff?
Tricky to go at the end here are really good answers. There was a question we used to use when we were thinking about program and school model design when I was school-based. And the question was, do kids want to be here? And so I think the implementation really matters, but I think what Sarah said about like teachers want to use it, also do kids want to use it? And
Yeah.
so because if the answer for teachers is no, and the answer from kids is no, it really doesn't matter how good or evidence aligned it is. But if there's a fire in the belly from both parties involved, you're going to get to that evidence-based impact. So I would ask, like, do kids want to use this? Do kids want to be here? And then how do we make a coherent program if the answer is yes?
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you everyone for joining today. We are hosting more in this series over the course of the spring and summer, so please make sure that you are subscribed to TLA's newsletter to stay in the know of the future topics and dates. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.